What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking the best picks in every round for your 2021 fantasy football drafts. Basically, these are the guys that we think have the highest upside round by round and the guys we are most often targeting in those situations. So make sure to tune in. If you enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. Let us hear it in the comment section, whether you agree, disagree, along with any other questions you guys might have. We will do our best to answer them all. And lastly, check us out online at alldaypigskin.com. And while you're there, get yourself a copy of the 2021 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Everything you can want at a great value. Details in the description. But with that being said, let's kick this thing off. And a quick note, this is mostly based on PPR scoring. So just keep that in mind. And obviously, this will differ in league to league based on the way it's set up, based on the size of the league, based on the rosters that you have. So we're talking your typical one quarterback, two running back, two wide receiver, a tight end, a flex league, no crazy scoring bonuses, no nothing like that. So just keep all those things in mind. But enough of that. Let's kick it off with the first round. And don't worry, we're not going to keep it as simple as Christian McCaffrey in the first round. No, we're going to be talking Austin Ekeler in the first round of your fantasy football drafts. Ekeler is a guy, he's been on the top of our list in terms of top must-own players for the season. He's been a guy that we think is going to have a huge bounce-back campaign and one of the biggest steals in fantasy football drafts. I've said it before, I'll continue to say it in this video. Ekeler, to me, is a no-brainer first-round selection. In my opinion, he's being still drafted way too low, even though his ADP has been steadily increasing, especially in PPR formats, to a guy that's being drafted maybe 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th overall. If you can get him anywhere, outside of the top 3, top 4 picks, in my opinion, that is an absolute steal. That tells you how highly I view him for all the reasons I've mentioned before. But basically, summarized again, look, he's playing on one of the most improved offensive lines in the NFL. He's one of the top pass catchers on his own team, if not the top one. Him and Keenan Allen, 1A, 1B, playing with a great young quarterback that airs out the football in Justin Herbert. He's got coaching staff there that have experience with the guy in Alvin Kamara and how he's been utilized. Somebody that has a 1,000 yard, upside. I love all these things about Austin Ekeler. Other than last year, he's been healthy all of his career, so I don't buy into the whole injury theory here or the fact that he's going to wear down as the season progresses. I love everything about Ekeler. To me, he is a no-brainer first-round selection, and he is my favorite, my top pick in your first rounds. Now, moving on, we get to the second round, and here I'm going to mention a couple of guys because this is where, to me, we see peak value in terms of wide receivers. And two of my favorite targets in the second round are one, Calvin Ridley, and then two, A.J. Brown of the Tennessee Titans. With Calvin Ridley, I absolutely love him. If we're talking standard or half-point PPR formats, I think he belongs right there in the conversation with the Tyreek Hill. Now, I don't think he'll necessarily get as many targets as, let's say, a Stephon Diggs, a DeAndre Hopkins, get as many receptions. But Julio Jones leaving Atlanta, Calvin Ridley was already a star, but this catapulted him into potentially wide receiver 1 overall type of conversations. Matt Ryan is a pass-happy quarterback. The Falcons are still a ways away before they potentially implement a run-first type of offense like Tennessee had. So they're still probably going to be top 5 in terms of pass attempts. And that means a lot of volume for Calvin Ridley, who thrived last season, whether it was with Julio Jones, without Julio Jones. He's the top target for Matt Ryan, the most trusted guy on that offense. So for that reason, I absolutely love him. You can get him in the middle to potentially end of the second round. That is a steal for me. It can absolutely be your wide receiver 1. And then we've got A.J. Brown of the Tennessee Titans, a guy that's going towards the end of the second round. I love that value. I think I'd have zero problem if you took him in the middle of that second round, maybe even a little bit earlier on. The reason for that is I don't really see Julio Jones joining the Tennessee Titans as a big detriment to A.J. Brown. I think you have somebody opposite him that will take away a lot of, defenders. And to me, A.J. Brown is the number one wide receiver for the Tennessee Titans. Better chemistry with Tannehill, a little bit younger, maybe not as many injury concerns as well. So I really like the value for A.J. Brown. I think he's going to get a lot of targets. Yes, I realize this offense still goes through Derrick Henry, but A.J. Brown last season, even when that was still the case, he was absolutely sensational when he was on the field, was a guy that had a lot of high upside in scoring, and I think that'll continue to be the case here. I also really like him as a guy, again, similar to a Calvin Ridley, that is very good in terms of your potential wide receiver one. And again, if you can get him towards the end of the second round, that is an absolute steal. I even see him going in the third round, which is even better if you can get that type of value. But let's move on here to the third round, which I think is a very, very intriguing place. And we'll move on to two names here. One, Keenan Allen, wide receiver for the LA Chargers. Again, continuing that theme of weapons on the LA Chargers offense. I said it with Austin Ekeler. I'll say it with Keenan Allen. I think this offense will have two very consistent producers, one being Ekeler, the other being Keenan Allen. And in PPR formats, Keenan Allen is absolutely disrespected. In my opinion, he is a top 10 wide receiver, has an extremely, extremely high floor. I would say he's almost bust-proof. Okay, maybe he won't get you as many 40-plus point games as some of these other wide receivers, but he's as safe as you could want, pretty much a lock for like 15 points every single week. And I love that type of value in the third round, especially its full PPR scoring. But let's move on here to Chris Carson of the Seattle Seahawks. And again, to me, he's a guy that's similar to a Keenan Allen. Honestly, every single year just disrespected, and you can get a great value on him most years. Once we get closer to September, the ADP tends to rise a little bit. Similar again with a Keenan Allen. Probably right now you're going to see him go in the middle to the end of the third round. Any later, again, it's a steal. A couple of months ago, he was a fourth round selection. If you can get him in the fourth round, that's tremendous value there. This is a team in Seattle. They want to focus on the run, and Chris Carson has been that guy for them. Even when they go on hot and cold streaks, even during those, lulls offensively, Chris Carson can still be relied upon because that's what the coaching staff wants to focus on, for the better or for the worse, especially when talking Russell Wilson's value. But with Chris Carson, some might be worried about Rashad Penny or the guys behind him. That's been the case in terms of that backfield and who's been there for a couple of years now, and Chris Carson still hasn't had anybody really threaten him. Rashad Penny has struggled to stay healthy his entire career, so I'm not worried about any of the guys there. I see Chris Carson as a potential top 12 running back. He's an underrated pass catcher and somebody that I really, really love in that third round range on a pretty good offense as well. But let's move on here to the fourth round. And again, I want to point out a couple of players here. One of them will be Amari Cooper of the Dallas Cowboys. The reason I want to point him out here is because everybody is singing the praises of one CeeDee Lamb, and no issue with that. We listed him as a potential breakout candidate at the wide receiver position. I get it. He's the sexy name, but let's not forget about Amari Cooper. When Dak Prescott was healthy last season, Cooper was outpacing CeeDee Lamb in pretty much every single meaningful wide receiver category. And I get it. Lamb is that shiny new toy, and people are talking about him. Amari Cooper a little bit maybe more inconsistent, but I think this is the type of offense that can sustain, two fantasy relevant wide receivers, the 1A and the 1B. And I really think that's the way it should be with Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. In fact, I have them ranked relatively close together as far as fantasy football wide receiver rankings are concerned. But the fact that you can get Amari Cooper a full round later, to me, is an absolute steal. And again, I think he can be a very decent low-end wide receiver one. And basically what you're expecting from CeeDee Lamb, you'd have probably similar expectations from Amari Cooper as well. Now, I'm going to bring up one more name here in this fourth round, a guy that probably across some of your draft boards hasn't properly been updated in James Robinson. You see him here as the RB25, 62nd overall, but his ADP will skyrocket now, probably to the fourth round is where I'm projecting it to go, because he falls in that Chris Carson, Darrell Henderson, Myles Gaskin territory. And obviously the reason why, Travis Etienne out for the season. So James Robinson, now all of a sudden, well, he projects to be James Robinson of 2020. And that was a very valuable fantasy football player. This offense should be better than it was last season. And James Robinson won't really have any competition behind him. He's going to be involved as a pass catcher, as a rusher. He's going to be the every down back. We won't have to worry about Travis Etienne taking away opportunities. Like the only real guy behind him, Carlos Hyde, I'm not worried about Hyde at all. James Robinson does everything better than him. To me, he becomes, a top 15 running back. If you can get that in the 4th round, I'm absolutely pulling the trigger on that. But let's move on here to the 5th round. And I want to start off with one TJ Hawkinson. For me, TJ Hawkinson is a tight end that I absolutely love. I think he's going to be the Darren Waller of this season. And, some people might take him earlier, might reach a little bit for him, but he is outside of that tier 1 category, even though I think this time next year, we're going to be talking about him in the same way we're talking about Waller right now, because you look at the targets for the Detroit Lions. No Marvin Jones, no Kenny Golladay. It's TJ Hawkinson. That's it. He could very well lead this entire offense in every single meaningful pass catching category. And you can do that as a tight end. That's an absolute cheat code for fantasy football purposes. The head coaches have come out and said that themselves. There's a very good possibility of that. I'm not worried about Jared Goff at all. The guy has sustained Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp at the same time before. I think he can sustain TJ Hawkinson as well. And a guy that has such huge upside that you can get, 2-3 rounds later after a Darren Waller, I'd be pulling the trigger on all day, every day. And the last guy I want to talk here about in the 5th round is Kyler Murray. You might see him, ranked all over the place. And this one is really very dependent based on where your league mates kind of take those quarterbacks. But the majority of platforms right now, this is the way it breaks. Patrick Mahomes at the end of the 2nd, early 3rd round. And then there's kind of a lull. And then in the 5th round, you see guys like Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson. And I think that's tremendous value for these guys that can be both, the number 1 quarterback. But I specifically highlight Kyler Murray here because I think he's more of a complete quarterback, has a much higher upside in terms of passing ability. He's in a great high-scoring offense, and he will, at the same time, be top 3 in terms of rushing yards for the quarterback position. So for that, a guy that's probably going to be pretty close to Patrick Mahomes when it's all said and done, I have him as my number 2 quarterback on the season, and you can get almost 3 rounds later than Patrick Mahomes. I would do that all day, every day in the 5th round if you can for Kyler Murray, and if you're set on getting a tier 1 quarterback. But let's move on here to the 6th round. And again, there are 2 names that I want to highlight. One is T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals. And for me, T. Higgins is a guy that, again, a lot of people are disrespecting just because everybody has kind of fallen in love with, Jamar Chase, with the rookie, with a sexy name here. I think this is a situation, again, kind of similar to Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb. Yes, everybody wants to heap all this praise on Jamar Chase, but there's going to be an adjustment period here, folks. And during that time, T. Higgins will be able to thrive. He showed us last season that he was a big part of this offense in his rookie year. And I'm not saying that Jamar Chase won't be great, but in theory, both these guys should be ranked very close together, which I can appreciate in these rankings. But the problem is, it's not like that every single platform to platform. And for that reason, I do want to highlight this because if you can get T. Higgins a full round after Jamar Chase, that's an absolute steal in my opinion. And I think that this is going to be an offense that's going to be very pass heavy. The defense still has a lot of room for improvement. And for me, T. Higgins is, again, going to be in a situation, worst case scenario, like 1A, 1B type of role. And on a pass heavy offense, he's the guy that I would want to own in this offense. But the last name here, I want to focus in on the 6th round. This might be a little bit of a stretch, but we've got Mike Davis of the Atlanta Falcons. Now, I think he's right around that 5th round, 6th round type of category. So if you want to put him in the 5th round, that's all right. I've got him here in the 6th round. And, in my opinion, he's somebody that in PPR formats is a guy that offers a decent amount of upside. he's a pretty good pass catcher. He's going to be utilized that way. There's no real competition behind him, so he's going to be getting the goal line carries. He's going to be getting the majority of carries, either way. An every down type of running back. We saw it last season when he was with the Panthers. He was able to succeed while Christian McCaffrey was out. And even though his success might only be for, a short term, not 2021 and onwards, just for this year, if you can get him towards the end of the 5th round, early 6th round, to me, that is a great value for a guy that can contribute week in and week out for the entire season on your roster. But let's move on here to the 7th round of your fantasy football drafts. And we're going to go a little bit down here. We're going to talk a couple of individuals. One of them will be quarterback Matthew Stafford of the LA Rams. And with Matthew Stafford, I've said this before, he is one of my favorite late round targets because I feel like people are forgetting how great he really is. The guy was sensational in Detroit his first couple of years when he had just one weapon in Calvin Johnson with him. Now, in arguably the best offense he's ever had, with an exceptional defense as well. I'm so excited for Matthew Stafford. I think that the head coaches, the reason they paid an absolute ransom for him is because they realize they're in a win now type of mode, and they're going to try and get everything they can from Matthew Stafford now. So I'm not worried about them saving him for the postseason because, again, this is a very tough division. So they're going to have to give it their all every single week when they have to contend with like the 49ers, with the Seattle Seahawks, even with the Cardinals. But for me, Matthew Stafford is a guy that's going to be, again, drafted right around that quarterback 10, 9, 11 range, that he has legitimate top 5 upside. Like, you look at the weapons around him, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Higbee, Henderson, a decent offensive line, and that great defense that will translate to more offensive opportunities. Stafford, if you've punted on the quarterback position and, decided to get one of those guys that's outside of the top 10 quarterbacks, I absolutely love Matthew Stafford. And then the last guy here I want to mention in the 7th round is Ronald Jones of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Okay, sure, he's not as high maybe on your list because in PPR scoring formats, he's not really all that great of a pass catcher. But to me, Ronald Jones is the running back that you want to own in this backfield. He's a guy that I would say is the highest upside out of all of them. We saw it last season when the guy was healthy. He was on a stretch where he was like a top 10 type of running back. And again, this is an offense that's going to have a lot of scoring opportunities. So Ronald Jones is going to have a lot of upside in terms of the touchdown category. I think Giovanni Bernard being added to this offense, it didn't hurt Ronald Jones as much as it hurt Leonard Fournette. Like, Ronald Jones is still going to be the guy that's getting the majority of the rushing opportunities. And when we're talking ultimately like 7th, 8th round type of selection, Ronald Jones is a guy that falls in that category, similar to like maybe a Damian Harris, maybe a Raheem Mostert, maybe a Melvin Gordon. Out of all those guys, when I think about the value, he's the one that I would most want to target. And then with that being said, let's move on to the 8th round. And here I want to focus on 2 wide receivers, one being Brandon Cooks of the Houston Texans, and this one asterisk next to it, a bit dependent on what happens with Deshaun Watson. If Deshaun Watson plays, Brandon Cooks is going to be an absolute steal wherever you get him, because when healthy, the guy, all he does, no matter what team he's on, just produces 1,000 plus yard seasons. And without Will Fuller in Houston, this offense will go through Brandon Cooks, and that's going to mean a whole lot of volume, and that's really important for the wide receiver position. It doesn't really matter about the offensive line like it might for a running back. Cooks is going to get the volume here. I think he's going to get a bunch of receptions. Maybe, honestly, I could see him getting career highs this year, but again, it all ties back to the quarterback, because if it's not Deshaun Watson, and, we've got a Tyrod Taylor situation on our hands, the ceiling is capped for Brandon Cooks. But at the same time, even if that's the case, getting a guy that I think worst case scenario would be a mid-level wide receiver 2 is pretty good value when we're talking the 8th round. And now, speaking of other great wide receiver values in the 8th round, I want to touch on Antonio Brown of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, a guy that I am very, very high on when you consider where his counterparts are being drafted. That is Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Those two guys are going to be going in the 3rd, 4th round, like at the latest. But to me, they all have legitimately the same upside. That's like a, mid-level wide receiver too, because there's just too many mouths to feed. And if you're saying that's not the case, just look at last year. Okay, when Mike Evans was the only guy, he was awesome. He was sensational. He was a weekly winner. But then what happens when Chris Godwin returns from injury? Well, less targets for Mike Evans. What happens when Antonio Brown is added to the offense? Even less targets for Mike Evans, a little bit less targets for Chris Godwin, and it kind of equals out to where Antonio Brown is also heavily involved in this offense. He's got the chemistry with Tom Brady. We saw him succeed when the other guys were a little bit nicked up, so he can handle the workload as well. I really think Antonio Brown, considering you can get him 4 or 5 rounds later than Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, he's a guy that out of this entire trio of wide receivers, the only one that I'm interested in. I think they all have very similar, again, outcomes in terms of wide receiver finishes. So for that reason, Antonio Brown at this point in your drafts is almost a must target in my opinion. But let's make our way here now to the 9th round. A couple of guys that I want to bring up yet again. One of them is Jamal Williams of the Detroit Lions. And I've been saying this about Jamal Williams for a long, long time. The whole DeAndre Swift, workhorse theory is kind of a big question mark at this point in time. In fact, he might not be ready for week 1 if you look at certain reports. And that means that Jamal Williams is going to be the workhorse for the Detroit Lions, at least during that short term. But even when he's not, Anthony Lynn has come out and said, hot hand approach. Potentially, we really like Jamal Williams. He's going to get his opportunities. And we're not afraid to just stick with one of these guys if they have it really going on. So to me, what that says is Jamal Williams is going to be a very viable option. And, depending on how serious this groin injury is for DeAndre Swift, the fact that he's missed already so much time, Jamal Williams is a guy that I absolutely love in PPR formats. I think he can be like a J.D. McKissic, maybe like a Kareem Hunt of last season. That might be a little bit optimistic. And honestly, you're probably going to see him go later than the 9th round. But when I just look at the value, I'd be all right taking him at this point in time. I think he has weekly flex appeal. And for that reason, I really like him at this point on an offense where you're going to be looking at a lot of targets. Arguably your best pass catchers are Hawkinson, Williams, and DeAndre Swift when available. But let's scroll down a little bit further here and look at another target that I really like towards this point in time. That is Russell Gage of the Atlanta Falcons. Again, I think he's extremely, extremely underrated. I don't understand how you can have him outside of your top 50 wide receivers. Once Julio Jones left, to me, Russell Gage became like a top 35 wide receiver on this offense. I said it with Calvin Ridley. It's a pass-heavy offense year after year. They're top 5 in pass attempts. I know people are absolutely losing, their mind over Kyle Pitts. To some extent, I get it. But again, folks, he's a first-year rookie tight end. It doesn't automatically click for him. It really depends how he's going to be utilized. And Russell Gage, similar to Calvin Ridley, when Julio Jones was hurt, he stepped in and he got it done. I think he can do it again for this offense. And being a wide receiver, too, for the Atlanta Falcons, that's very valuable in fantasy football drafts. This is, I'd feel very comfortable taking him at this point in time. If you can get him later, which you definitely will be able to, kudos to you. But, this is more so a testament of how early I would feel comfortable taking Russell Gage. Again, I think he's a guy similar to like an Antonio Brown, wide receiver 2 type of upside. I'd be perfectly fine playing as my weekly flex play. But let's move on now to the 10th round, and this will be the final round that we cover just because afterwards it becomes really a big-time crapshoot. You're going to be looking at kickers, defenses. So to me, I think doing a 10-round kind of breakdown is still very informative. And the guy I want to focus on here is Marquez Callaway of the New Orleans Saints, a guy that's been a big-time sleeper these last couple of weeks. Maybe you haven't even heard his name, but the last couple of days, his stock has absolutely skyrocketed. Essentially, he is the number 1 wide receiver for the New Orleans Saints while Michael Thomas is out, which again, we still don't know how long that will be for. And the thing is, The guy has really separated himself from the other weapons on this team. We've seen it in the preseason. We've seen it in training camp. We've seen it from the New Orleans beat writers as well. And again, this is probably going to be like the earliest you see him go, but I wouldn't be shocked if there's somebody that takes him like in the 11th, 12th round. And just to be safe, maybe target him in the 10th round. He has serious upside, a guy that's gaining a lot of steam. Yes, I realize once Michael Thomas returns that he's going to, be tempered a little bit in terms of expectation, but then you've got the question, when will that happen? Will it be to the New Orleans Saints when Michael Thomas does return? All questions that we don't really know the answer to. So Marquez Callaway right now, I think could be a very nice, kind of short-term addition at the wide receiver spot, who has some really great starting opportunities, especially if Jameis Winston is the starter. I should mention that. And if he's got a really solid start to the season, I think you can flip him in a trade to get a lot. He's going to be a hot name, so just keep him in mind. But with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown of the must draft guys round by round. If so, hit that like button, subscribe, let us hear it in the comments section, whether you agreed, disagreed, along with any other questions you guys might have. And again, lastly, check us out online at alldaypigskin.com. And while you're there, get yourself a copy of the 2021 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. Everything you can want at a great value. Details in the description. But with that being said, we'll see you in future videos.